مساء الخير، اهلا وسهلا فيكم. كمان اهلا وسهلا فيكم بجمعية القافة العربية. هذا البرنامج عمليا ندوة اليوم هي تحت اطار برنامج اسمه الملتقى قافي اللي عاملينه برنامج شهري بجمعية القافة العربية. عمليا مرة كل اسبوعين واحيانا مرة كل اسبوع بتنوع بين عروض افلام وبين ندوات حول ابحاث ودراسات حول الثقافة والفن بفلسطين وكمان العالم العربي. اليوم الندوة رح تكون بعنوان مشاهد في السياسة عن الفن المعاصر بين الفلسطينيين في الداخل. رح أقدمها د.ستروم اللي هو محاضر في الأنثروبولوجي في الجامعة الأمريكية في القاهرة. وعمليا هو البحث نتاج دراسي اشتغل عليها أثناء إقامته في حيفا أظن which year was 2009 2011. وبالأساس هو باختصار فحص العلاقة ما بين الفن والسياسي، التأثير السياسي على الفن والعلاقة الجدلية بين الاثنين بين جيل الشباب والفنانين خاصة ما بعد الانتفاضة الثاني وما بعد حرب أكتوبر. Welcome, Kevin. You can start.
So when I have a slide, I'll let you.
Yes, I will see. Yes, wait 1 second.
Thank you, Russia. It's an honor for me to be here today because I've always wanted in my work to come back after I did my research and to share back the sort of results and where I went with the research that I did between 2009 and 2011. And I want to thank the Arab Cultural Association for having me in Russia, and it's really good experience for me to come back and have this moment. I first came to Haifa in 2009 to do fieldwork for my doctorate. If at any point I go too slow or I'm not loud enough, just say something. My project at the time was concerned with how culture was being discussed and promoted by local NGOs. In short, in happenstance, I happened to find myself living in an area of Haifa where many artists were living, and writers and painters and actors, and I started just to sort of turn more towards them and away from the sort of NGO sort of aspect and looking at the actual cultural producers here of the Palestinians in 48. And I'm putting this addition to the thing for you. I've long followed the situation in Palestine, Israel, starting from a very young age when my family invited a student at my dad, where my dad taught for many years. And he stayed with us for the summer. And over that summer, he told me about Palestine and the struggle of Palestinians, and I was 12, 13 at the time. He was a young Jewish man who lived in Beirut during the first Intifada and described himself as a militant pro-Palestinian activist. So I got this whole history from him, and since that time, and we're talking nearly 30 years, I've remained an avid reader of this situation here. But only with my doctorate did I actually decide to take on this subject and do research, to feel it was time to do something more than just read about it. So to come back here today and share with you my research has always been of utmost importance. If possible, I want to add to the conversations that are taking place, to offer as a gift, in a way, what I can give to the struggle of Palestinians here in 48 and elsewhere. What I have to share today is based on my experience, what I saw and heard, what I felt, what I sensed during my time here. Art and politics and their relationship are historically shifting ideas. What I saw and heard between 2009 and 2011 during my fieldwork is just a glimpse of a particular moment in time, and a limited one at that. Nevertheless, I think if many of the ideas I will just discuss today are still at work within the Palestinian art scene. My discussion today must not be understood as comprehensive. That is, it might not be relevant to all the artists and artworks being produced here from even the time I came till now. Artists have different strategies and different agendas, some of which will resonate with what I have to say and some will not. The art scene among Palestinians in Israel is a very fragmented space with opportunities for funding and exhibition far and few between. I don't necessarily see this fragmentation as a bad thing. It offers artists an autonomous space to create and to work without feeling contained by an overarching discourse on what is or what should be Palestinian art. My research would not have been possible if it weren't for the warmth and generosity of the people I met, who became friends and who looked after me and welcomed me into their worlds. Like all ethnographic work, my research has been a constant collaboration with artists and friends. I want to thank especially Nardine Srouji and Riyad Shamas for always pushing me to look further and always to listen more. I also want to thank Bilal Zara, who couldn't be here, but for taking me in the first months of research and showing me around and taking me to in the Galilee just to see the land. I want to thank all the artists with whom I worked for opening up their studios, for answering my naive and sometimes misguided questions, for giving their time. Mika Halak, Maisa Ezezi, Nadine Srouji, Sharif Waked, Dorar Bakri, Mahmoud Kais, Ahmad Kanan, and Manal Zalbi. And I thank all of you I want to thank all of those people who sat with me over those 15 months and shared their experiences and thoughts and struggles and pain and their dreams and hopes. Now, while what I share with you today was only possible, the grace, that doesn't work in English, thanks to these people, at the end of the day, it is my experience. I sometimes switch to French. So it's based on what I saw and what I heard, and therefore it's my perspective. So I'm going to start with scene one. Okay, go. In a series of subdued browns, greens, grays, yellows, and a bit of white, this painting by Maisa Ezezi presents a view of a typical overcrowded town, not unlike many overcrowded Palestinian towns in Israel, the West Bank, or even the refugee camps throughout the region. Homes are here built on top of one another, each a different size, a different color, a different shape. For the most part, windows have their shades drawn. Electric and telephone lines and poles are scattered chaotically between and across the homes, cutting in at various angles as if to suggest a single thread running between them. If the details at the center are vibrant and meticulous, the edges of the canvas are unfinished, with the town appearing to hover inside a small white band surrounding the work. The bottom is pronouncedly diffused, as if unsure of its location. It is a chaotic image, much like the reality it depicts. Almost an anonymous town, floating in space, identity and location unknown. A further striking characteristic in this painting is the lack of dimensionality, as you can see. There are no shaded areas, no shadows, no streetlights. If this were all there was to this painting, there would not much to say, not much to think about. But there is more. 4 white lines overlay and split the image. What are these lines and what are they doing? Unlike the edges of the painting, which have a chaotic feel to them, these 4 lines which adjoin with the white edges, you don't see all the bottom, but they adjoin at the bottom edges, are very clean and precise. They are perhaps the cleanest line in all of the painting. The lines are not perfectly straight lines from top to bottom, however. Rather, they seem to bulge in the middle and even come out of the canvas, as if the town behind is pushing them toward us. In this sense, they give the space behind a depth and dimensionality, albeit a town that's distanced from the viewer. I forgot, I'll tell you next time, Maisa replied to my question about these enigmatic and disturbing white lines. This is the first time I met Maisa, and I wasn't surprised she didn't have an answer to my question. I was surprised. Surely the artist should have an answer. These white lines were not there by accident. I pressed on. Yet each time she seemed to start to offer me an answer, she'd hesitate, and then offer me more or less the same response. She would tell me next time. She never told me the next time, or the time after, or the time after. As our conversations went on, back and forth about the white lines, and as I began to realize that she might again have me wait, I decided to take the initiative and prepare my own interpretation, with the far-fetched hope she'd disagree, and thereby feel compelled to correct me. She listened to my comments, sometimes seeming to agree, but nevertheless, never revealing anything more about the white lines. Finally, one day when I decided to press her more than usual, she told me that these lines were what I wanted them to be, that she'd prefer to know what I thought they were. As the months went by and we continued our conversation, the meaning of these enigmatic white lines had become a playful way for us to start an inside joke we shared, each of us knowing there would never be an answer. By this time, I had started to accept that these white lines had no determinate meaning, but instead must be approached from the affect they created, the disruption of the town that was behind them. In this painting, we are presented with an anonymous place, a place out of place. Indeed, without these white lines, this painting could easily be seen to represent the condition of being Palestinian, out of place, displaced, exiled, a stranger, all tropes within the Palestinian narrative. Yet with the supplement of these crisp white lines, not only is our view disrupted, so I would argue, is that meaning. In other words, the white lines don't simply obstruct our view of this town, they interrupt the narrative that we actually attach to it. So today what I want to talk about is the politics that is at work in this artwork and two others that I'll show you. I'm going to put forward that these artworks force us to rethink the relationship between art and politics in contemporary Palestinian art in Israel. They asked us to think about politics, to think about a politics that is not about an appropriation by artists of a national narrative in the name of an idea, an identity, or a struggle. But rather, I want to look at the inverse, which is to say, they open spaces, or what I call scenes of aesthetic possibilities, that can be appropriated by viewers, spectators, subjects, into new forms of life. Indeed, it is up to the viewer to capitalize, or not, on these aesthetic possibilities, to imagine new forms of communality, new modes of belonging, futures otherwise. When talking about Palestinian cultural production, the question of politics is obviously never far away. Indeed, as the Palestinian cultural critic Helga Tawasori has stated, the very act of producing culture for Palestinians is inherently political, insofar as it contests and resists their silencing and erasure. Leaving aside for the moment the enormous problems that ensue when claiming everything is political, a point I'll come back to, I want to focus on Tawasori's bold assertion that the task of cultural production remains one of national, and quote, national self-expression, self-representation, and self-realization. She claims, in short, that those forms of cultural production that do not represent the Palestinian national narrative are somehow not political, or at least not political enough. They will be, she continues, anomalous, a deviation from the norm, and forgotten in the annals of Palestinian culture. Her example in this case are the films of Elias Suleiman. Personally, I find it hard to believe that his films will be forgotten in the annals of Palestinian culture. While I agree with Tawasori that politics and cultural production are deeply intertwined in Palestine, I do not share in her conclusion that only those forms that are explicitly national self-expression, self-representation, and self-realization are worthy politically. On the contrary, it would be my contention that contemporary Palestinian art in Israel manifests a space of politics, or better, conducts politics, at the very moment it disrupts the given structures of national narratives and identities. That is, when it disrupts and interrupts given forms of representation and narration. Let me put this more simply. The logic implicit to Tawasori's argument is that what makes art political rests on its appropriation of politics, whether it be a given nationalistic narrative, identity, or social struggle, or social issue. As I have already, and this is a common theme across the thinking in the relationship between art and politics, that art appropriates politics. As I've already suggested, I want to turn this logic on its head. If we are to capture the politics of works of art in Palestine today, and not immediately disqualify them for a lack of explicit nationalist self-expression and self-representation, we need to begin to work in reverse. That is, to understand how new possibilities of narration and visibility are being opened up within artistic practices, and how they can be appropriated by politics. If the white lines in Meis's painting disturbs and overwhelms the viewer or spectator by slipping out of reach of those given structures by which we fix or determine meaning, the result is an experience of what I call insensibility. In other words, the heterology of elements, this assemblage of elements without correspondence or a given relationship, ruptures the relationship between sense, or what is being perceived through our senses, and the meaning or sense that we attach to those sense perceptions. Their relation being undecidable. My question therefore concerns precisely this insensibility and the aesthetic possibilities it opens. As I hope will become clear, I'm not suggesting that politics resides in the artwork itself. Rather, it is through the experience of the insensible produced in this artwork that we, the viewer or spectator, are invited to consider how art might conduct a politics. That is, how art manifests scenes for imagining and configuring new forms of commonality and belonging. More specifically, I want to explore how this artwork, as well as the others I will show, creates spaces or scenes in which uncounted, invisible, or forgotten subjects can appear, subjects between nationalist narratives and identities. I want to consider how manifesting such scenes invites Palestinians in Israel to reconfigure their commonality and belonging as subjects within a state that excludes them by definition, and a Palestinian discourse in which their voices have been absent. Scene 2. Attached to what appears to be cardboard with two pieces of masking tape is the notorious blue ID carried by all Israeli citizens. We are not sure why it is attached to this cardboard. Indeed, it seems odd and out of place, an assemblage of objects that are unrelated. We can quickly surmise that this is likely a shipping box because below the ID is the familiar label warning, fragile, handled with care, with the symbol of a glass. But what precisely is fragile? Is it the ID card or what is in the box? If so, or is this warning that an ID is not securely attached to the shipping box? If so, how could an official document that attests and certifies one's identity and belonging be left in such a fragile state? Why not attach it more assuredly, with more tape, perhaps even a plastic cover? Even more, why attach it at all to the outside of a shipping box? Inside this ID card is the identity of the owner, his or her full name, place of birth, address, identification numbers, and most significantly and contentiously, if he or she is Jewish or Arab. But here we don't know. The cover of this ID is closed, even sealed with two pieces of tape, Jew or Arab. We can only guess what the contents of this ID contain. As we continue to inspect this image more closely, we soon discover that it is a painting. It is a meticulous and detailed painting with every shadow, every texture, every fold, and every tear clearly visible, as if it were a photograph. As a form of hyperrealism, it asserts itself as more than reality itself. It is a disfiguration of reality that acts as if it is real. In assembling these found objects into this relationship, this painting suspends the given and attached meanings of the controversial blue ID by creating a fictional reality, and as if that invites the viewer to imagine other possibilities and to make their own stories. The invisible man, a trapped minority, the forgotten Palestinians. These are all terms that have been used to describe the Palestinians in Israel. Trapped as they are between two national narratives. On one side is the settler colonial project and its exclusive nationalist narrative. On the other, a Palestinian nationalist narrative that has been long dominated by the political agenda of the West Bank and Palestinian Authority. On the one side is a Zionist narrative that ultimately seeks the dispossession and displacement, that ultimately seeks through dispossession and displacement the erasure of Palestinians, a colonial project that predates the establishment of the state and is today inscribed in the very structure of society itself, from its laws and policies to its practices of social segregation and discrimination. On the other side is a Palestinian national narrative in which they have historically remained unheard and unseen, invisible and forgotten. It is a condition whereby the right to speak and be heard, to see and be seen, has too often not included the Palestinians outside of 67, whether Palestinians living in Israel or refugees. It is a narrative that frames discussions about being Palestinian, about who can be seen, who can look, who can speak, and who can be heard. The anthropologist Dan Rabinovitz writes, Palestinians living in Israel are, quote, trapped in a double marginality, held between two centers of political gravity, painfully aware of two conflicting national narratives, and experience with their lives and property two systems of legitimization. So in one direction is the demand for full equality in a state that defines itself as Jewish and democratic, while in the other, and at the same time, an assertion of one's place within the Palestinian narrative. Far from being contradictory, these dual demands are at the core of the 48 Palestinian experience. Together, these two poles are the condition of being between two narratives. My point here is that despite their obvious differences and clear opposition, their different histories and the unequal power relations, the logic at work within both the Zionist settler colonial project and the dominant Palestinian nationalist narrative is the delimitations of spaces and times, of the invisible and the visible, of speech and noise that simultaneously determines the place and stakes of politics. In other words, in their own way, each demarcates who can be seen, who can see and be seen, who can speak and who can be heard. More specifically, both revolve around what is seen and what can be said about it, around who has the capacity to see and speak, around the properties of spaces and the possibilities of time. In short, to cite Edward Said, it is about who has the permission to narrate. Floating in the air above a small brown glass bottle resting on the ground, seemingly defying gravity, a 3-meter-tall gleaming metal funnel overtakes the small room. And taking over the room, the oversized funnel forces us, the spectators, to walk around the edges of the space, restricting in turn the number of people who can enter it at any one time. And as we, the spectators, turn around the object, we soon find ourselves unavoidably confronted by our own image reflected in the gleaming metal surface, an image that is unavoidably distorted. The metal composition of the funnel gives the work a distinctive industrial quality. Welding, rivets, and screws hold multiple individual gleaming metal panels together. The top half of the funnel opens to 3 meters across, while the bottom half is a longer nozzle-type shape that gradually narrows to a small opening of only a few centimeters. To recall that placed prudently below the large and daunting funnel is a small brown glass bottle that sits firmly on the ground. Centered precisely at the end of the funnel with only a few centimeters between, the diminutive stature of this little brown glass bottle gives a sense of it being threatened and overwhelmed, an affect reinforced by the stark contrast between the durability of the metal funnel and the fragility and finitude of glass. There is a conspicuous disproportion between the funnel and the small bottle, an inconceivable relationship in which whatever could be contained and moved through the funnel would clearly never fit in the bottle. In forcing us to move around it and in turn distorting the image of the spectator, the affect is one in which we are brought into a paradoxical relationship with the artwork. It is a relationship that both imposes itself on us, in which we, the spectators, are forced to move around it, and yet as we move around it, seeing it from all sides, we are confronted with a striking sense of absence. We do not know and cannot know the contents within the funnel, nor indeed if there are any contents whatsoever. We cannot see and we cannot therefore know. What we cannot see and cannot therefore know is made all the more disturbing by the contradiction between the funnel and the small glass bottle, in that it would never contain whatever would go through anyway. It is an impossible relation in which time and space are neutralized, where decisions about the relation between the funnel and bottle is left open to the viewer. In visually disturbing and upsetting the proper logic of the social world, that is, in establishing an excess within the given relation between sense perception, what we see, and the meaning we attach to those things we see, each of these works fundamentally revolves around an absence. If the white lines were unequivocally prison bars, or had some form of recognizable materiality such that the spectator could be assured of their meaning, or if the identity of the blue ID were finally revealed, or at least able to be known, or if we only knew the contents of the funnel, the respective excesses of these works would be effaced, and in turn their absences erased for the spectator. We would then know what they meant. Instead, through these excesses, each of the artworks manifests an absence that need not be filled by already established narratives and identities. Mises' painting, for instance, made me think of Nazareth and how the space to live and build is circumscribed, the town locked in, with building only ever moving upwards. The white lines disturb this given perception, separating us, the spectator, from the town behind and between, creating a distance through an excess of meaning. Through this excess, the town can be any town, in Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, wherever Palestinians live and work. It is therefore left to the spectator to fill this absence, to make their own stories. In Mikael's hyper-real Blue ID, we are again asked to become part of the artwork. That is, as spectators, we are invited to do the work of filling the absence of any identity, to tell our own stories of how identity can be both a source of emancipation, but equally a cage for ensuring bodies stay in their proper places with their proper capacities attached. In the time of my research, I showed this artwork to friends, and they responded with stories of their own experiences surrounding the Blue ID. Nardine's funnel again puts the spectator in a position of discomfort through its size, its open contradiction in the assemblage of elements that cannot work together, and most significantly, in the absence of transparency. The funnel, Nardine told me, is one of those objects found within the Palestinian home, the ubiquitous tool for refilling olive oil from the barrels where it is stored. Yet here the contents are not revealed, and we are left once again to make our own stories. It is my contention that through these moments of excess and presentations of absence, aesthetic possibilities are open in the artworks, what I want to call scenes of politics. What are scenes of politics? Scenes are invitations to the spectator to attend to these excesses and absences as aesthetic possibilities. An invitation to Palestinians in Israel, and indeed all Palestinians, to rethink and reconfigure the sensible world and common sense itself. They are invitations, in other words, to create new stories and new futures, to imagine new forms of commonality and belonging. The spectator in such scenes is not a subject framed by opposing national narratives that would predetermine your experience of the artwork, but a political subject that emerges in exercising their capacities of looking, seeing, speaking, and hearing. If we are looking for a politics of Palestinian art in Israel, it is in these scenes where the spectator becomes part of the work by attending to the invitation to make sense of the unsensible, again, to create their own narratives and tell their own stories. In attending to the artwork in this way, by putting oneself into the space of absence within them, the possibility of a new sensibility is created, a reconfiguring of who can speak and who can be heard, who can look and who can act. If these artworks invite the spectator to reconfigure their given world, they are also invitations to rethink their commonality and modes of belonging, who is in and who is out. It is in this sense that they are scenes for the emergence of political subjects, subjects who exercise the equality of anyone with everyone. Anyone and everyone has a capacity now to walk up an artwork and make their own story. Working within and between the binary of nationalist narratives, narratives that overdetermine subjects, objects, and situations and events, how they can be represented and how they are to be represented, the relationship between the artwork and the work of the spectator are scenes of politics in which uncounted, invisible, and forgotten subjects appear. From, as I said, from Palestinians of 48 to the refugees to the West Bank, wherever. Those who are not seen and not heard. They are scenes where anyone and everyone is invited to reconfigure intelligibility and possibility, creating new alternative possibilities for thought and action. Today, Palestine is in need of new alternative possibilities for thought and action. Yet, as we see far too often, this effort is stunted due to the gravity of nationalist narratives and their exclusions. It is my understanding that Palestinians in Israel are not simply demanding recognition, that is, a place within one or other of these discourses. Rather, by contesting authorized forms of dialogue and deliberation, they are attempting to redraw the relationships between time and place, visibility and invisibility, speech and noise upon which these laws, constitutions, narratives, and representations make sense. In disrupting these spatial configurations and their assigned identities, contemporary art among Palestinians in Israel, as an aesthetic practice, offers up aesthetic possibilities, other possibilities for reconfiguring the world. Yet, as I noted in the beginning, it is up to the spectator to capitalize or not on these aesthetic possibilities and imagine new forms of commonality, new modes of belonging, futures otherwise. For some years now, Palestinian artists, both in Israel as well as in 1967, have sought to problematize the dominant Palestinian nationalist narrative that is framed in work, both by Palestinians and Israelis, but also internationally by critics, curators, collectors, academics that demand and seek an inherent in politics within Palestinian art. In short, that Palestinian art should be a mode of national expression and self-representation. Applying these diverse artistic strategies, the works we've seen and others that I had seen, are efforts to disfigure the tropes and iconography of this narrative. As I'm suggesting, this does not mean that their work is apolitical, that the artists have abandoned politics altogether, but that instead this politics must be approached in these moments of disfiguration and the spectator. Whether the viewers or spectators attend to these moments as scenes of politics is not guaranteed. But if and when they do, the possibility of new stories and narratives that build across borders, identities, and political agendas will begin to take form, and with that, new modes of commonality and belonging will emerge. Thank you.
Open it for questions. بحب يوجه سؤال لكيفين. Thank you, Kevin. بحب يوجه سؤال فهو مدعوي.
It was a lot to maybe to
Yeah.
ingest.
أسئلة.
So let's start with the basic ones. Who's counted as a Palestinian artist?
Who's counted as a Palestinian artist? That's going to be a shifting category, isn't it? I mean, it's somebody who does something today might not be considered art, and then 10 years from now, we don't know. I mean, this is my point in the beginning. These categories are constantly shifting. What we count as art and what we count as politics. I'm thinking like you go back to Vera Tamari's installation where she did the destroyed cars. Maybe 20 years ago that would have never been considered art. So I think these categories are constantly shifting, and I think the shift is always taking place in relation to politics, and I think that's where that becomes important, to look at that shifting relationship, and now how politics also determines what art is, in a large sense.
I meant also like you've been guided like as also as an ethnologist.
Mm-hmm.
So you've probably been guided to know who are Palestinian artists working today. So like how do you think this like what's the limit of the perspective? Do you think this has a limit to the perspective that you can offer? Like by being guided through a certain type of Palestinian artists living in Israel. For example, you didn't, there's lots of people from Palestinian origin who will work in many arts fairs in the country. Not all will be around this scene of artists. So how this can, so all of this, let's for example see Palestinians working inside Israeli institutes will be omitted out of your perspective just by, for example, being guided through a certain type or a certain community of Palestinian artists.
Okay, I don't think, I think that there's some validity to what you're saying in the sense that I didn't see all the Palestinian artists there. It was limited. I got exposed to certain ones here and there, and I would follow. Halak is a good example of somebody who is part of the Israeli system. He won the Young Israeli Award in 2011 for Best Young Israeli Artist. Other artists don't participate, that I worked with, didn't participate at all within the Israeli system.
So it's again from Israeli view. If you are talking that you already talked with Michael about his work through the Israeli system.
I came to his work not through the Israeli system. I came to his work through people I knew here who knew him. It was only after I left my fieldwork that he got the award.
Okay.
But I didn't come, I mean, the fact that Mikael is in this, it works within the Israeli system, was a coincidence for me. It wasn't something I knew in the beginning. Like I just met him and sort of started to see his works and went to his studio and just started to talk to him. And only later did I find out that he was working within the gallery system here and had an agent in Tel Aviv and stuff. So it's not that I didn't intentionally choose him or not choose him for those reasons.
No, your choosing was about the Palestinian artists that live here in this territory that called now Israel.
Yeah.
So if we will talk about Palestinian art, it's not just here. It's divided, like our history and like if you want to defend what the meaning of Palestine. It's, for me, it's kind of something that's already divided to many pieces. So you can talk about the Palestinians that live in Gaza Strip, and about the Palestinians that live here in Israel, and about the West Bank and outside of this territory.
And I focus just on 48.
Yeah, but not, yeah.
But that's problematic for you.
No, it's not problematic. Okay, we should hear, I should...
I mean, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I concentrated on 48...
Because you didn't talk, okay, you give example about the contemporary art scene here. So I think, I don't know, I just saw here a minority.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so maybe it's good for your research.
I mean, the research is ongoing. It's not like I've ended the research. I mean, it's part of a bigger project, and this is the sort of first. I mean, I had 5 artists that I talked about in my dissertation. I only included 3 here, and I talked about multiple works by each of these artists, not just one work. So it was a much broader perspective. And I mean, I want to go back to the point about why I didn't include West Bank, Gaza, or even refugees, or even diaspora.
This is clear.
This is clear,
yeah.
Okay.
No, the question, like, I just, it's not, it's not a political debate. I just wanted, for example, what's your thought about the limits of defining who can be counted as a Palestinian artist? Did you think about how will you approach this question? As somebody coming from outside, like, because we also, like, this is not only a question for a person coming from outside, it's a very...
Even us asking this question.
Yeah, it's one of the main questions that comes in any researching Palestinian art. Even though that you're focusing in 48, that doesn't yet solve the question
of who's an artist and who's not an artist.
And who is a Palestinian.
Yes, Palestinian.
Like, not Palestinian by origin, but how can you define, like, I'm not asking, as an attack or something, I'm asking as a thought. I think that it's not an easy to answer.
It's more
how can you define a Palestinian art in such a situation?
I think it's
like
complicated to talk about Palestinian art. Like if we already have this issue that we have Palestinian art, so then we can define also whom is a Palestinian artist.
So what was your take on the subject? How did you approach the question? This was my question.
I came and I basically told the people I knew that I wanted to meet Palestinian artists. And they introduced me to who they thought were Palestinian artists. Some of those people defined themselves as artists, some didn't, some are still artists, some are not. So, yeah, how do you define who's an artist and who's not an artist here? Who's a Palestinian artist and who's not a Palestinian? Yeah, it's a big question.
Because that means in other cases, some people can consider Nadim, for example, as an Israeli artist or not.
That wouldn't be for me, that would be for
No.
Nadim.
Let the people choose what they are, and that's it.
So you are committed.
But I'm thinking about, was it Adam Bakri who did an interview with some magazine in the US about Omar? And in the interview he said, I'm a Palestinian Israeli. And the backlash against what he said by many people is, he's not Israeli, how can he say he's Israeli? And I think we get these questions about, are they Palestinian artists, are they Israeli artists, are they, it's, yeah, it's a complicated, and the question of how they get labeled as well. Sharif Waqed actually brought this up to me when I asked him, how is your work labeled in New York, for example? And he said, I don't care.
No, this question comes up not just in Palestine 48, like the question who's Palestinian and who's considered as Palestinian art is raised everywhere. even in the West Bank. Especially we have artists from the diaspora, and many of them they live in refugees camps or things like this, and sometimes they don't want to say they are Palestinians, maybe they are Jordanians. So it's a question that's always faced, and sometimes in research you have to be pragmatic and say, okay, I will do this, and it's an open discourse. Like he's not gonna put the solve the problem that this is Palestinian, this is not Palestinian. It's an ongoing discourse, and as long as we don't have country and documents and blah blah blah, this is issue that will continue to raise.
No, but may I? Of course, I totally
But
agree.
I think you came a little bit late because he started with this issue, like how he decided to talk about Palestinian.
But also, it's interesting because this same debate comes up everywhere. Who's an artist and who's not an artist, and what qualifies somebody as an artist.
Kevin, thank you. Well, speaking as an anthropologist, I'm concerned really with the anthropology of Palestine and less so with the definition of who is Palestinian. I think, although I have one quick comment to make, I worry of getting bogged down with the question of defining as Palestinian, because I worry sometimes we begin to mimic the Zionist problem, who is Jewish. So going beyond that, I must say that I found a bold and innovative steps that you take in this entire project. When I look at the larger field of the anthropology of Palestine, simply because it's long overdue that we look at Palestinians singing, dancing, painting, writing, and not just Palestinians in the typical political fields, if you see. There were Palestinians involved in aesthetic projects, as you show us here. One thing I'll take from the debate that so far happened here is it would have been helpful to really know why it is that you focus on Palestinians in 48 as opposed to including Palestinians elsewhere. But that being said, I want to make one comment and a question, and I'll conclude. I think it would have been helpful, and maybe it will continue to be helpful for you to look at how the question you're raising has been raised for quite some time elsewhere in Palestinian study. And I couldn't not think of the late work of Mahmoud Darwish, for example, who's been in what we call late style. In his late style, he's been deeply preoccupied with the connection between aesthetics and politics. This culminates in his mural, in his Jidariya. Why is it that I write poetry? Why is it that I pursue aesthetics? So I think it would be helpful for you to ground the questions, the deliberations that you hear from the artists in a wider aesthetic project that has occupied not just painters, but also poets and perhaps literary critics. And the final methodological question I would raise, you made the argument or the hypothesis that this art invites different political scenes, but we don't see that actually happening. Who are the spectators? We heard you. We didn't hear our viewers. Did you hear what I'm saying?
Hey,
that's it.
I'll go back first to the point about why 48. I mean, when I decided to do research in Palestine, a friend of mine who was from Taipei, we just began talking, and I said, nobody talks about Palestinians in 48. Like, the literature is very much focused on the West Bank, and that dominates sort of the discussion, and 48 tends to get just lumped in there as an addendum, if you want. And I thought, it's important to talk about the Palestinian experience here as well. And I wanted to sort of then, as I start to get into the art scene, I realized there's so little written on Palestinian art in Israel. There's very, very, very little written. And again, it gets sort of put back into the larger Palestinian discourse on art, like Bulata or those kind of works. So that's how I got to here. And also, I was interested in this what it's like to be an indigenous minority, and how cultural production plays, what role that plays in that. The bigger question, the methodological question, yeah, I mean, this is not, you know, this is why I always feel I'm bordering on being a curator, because I think it's in curating that this has to happen. It's in a way, how do you get people to come to see exhibitions, getting them to talk about the work, getting them to respond to the work, getting them to look at the work. This is a challenge here. It's a big challenge, and what I'm hoping to sort of put forward is, you know, I don't know here, but many people, at least in where I'm from in Canada, they don't go to museums because they look at this and go, I have no clue what's going on, why would I come here? And to try to sort of see the possibilities that are opening in the art, to sort of say, it is actually saying you can come and make your own story from it, rather than this idea that somehow a Barnett Newman that's a monochrome is somehow beyond my comprehension. That in a way, these works want to invite the spectator in. You have to take a space in these works in a way. But I mean, getting the spectators in, having them come and view, I have to spend more time to figure out why. What I'm trying, I think that point brings up what I've been trying to emphasize in the talk is this, there needs to be this spectator that's there, and we're lacking the spectator. That's really where the politics is going to happen, is once we take art and take it a place that it's supposed to go. I mean, art has always been about sort of giving us a new way of looking at things, and if we don't have that capacity the bravery to look at works and let it take us somewhere else, then it sort of doesn't go anywhere. And we end up with galleries with art in them nobody goes to. You see this in Cairo quite often. You go to galleries and there's no one there. Like, it's just amazing. And it's a city of 22 million people and there's no one in the galleries.